This video is dedicated to Ole Miss quarterback Matt Corral, not just because he got injured, but it's dedicated to Matt Corral and all the other NFL draft-eligible players who decided to lace them up one more time with their team, with their brothers, and compete on the field and finish out the season and not leave their team and quit on their team before the season was over. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. We break down the game we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. That's our aim, goal, and mission. And that's achieved because of your participation. So we ask that you would like the video. Please share the videos out on social media to create more interest and more conversation. And, of course, subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football and check out our 25 team channels, most of which are represented behind me. All right. This is a difficult topic. So let me state right out of the gate that I don't think there's a right or wrong here. In a society in which there is far too few scenarios in which we declare right and wrong, there is more right or wrong out there than we're aware of, or do we recognize or promote. But in this case, I do not believe there's a right or a wrong. On one hand, we have athletes who go out each day that there's a game, and even in practice, and risk their physical well-being and their future. And in this case, we have players who have determined based on feedback that they know that they are going to factor in prominently at the NFL draft. Okay, their college career is just about over. There's a separation of games from the regular season to a bowl game that is either meaningful or meaningless, depending on your perspective. And they have decided that they do not want to risk injury in this game, and they want to prepare for the NFL draft. Well, they have plenty of time to prepare for the NFL draft. So when they make that statement, that's a bit separated from reality, because all these other hundreds of players, they prepare for the NFL draft and do it quite fine and still play in a bowl game. So they do not need this time to prepare for the NFL draft. They are opting out of the game to not get injured, to eliminate the risk of injury. Okay, that's their right as an American. They can do that. They should have freedom of choice. Now, what do we do as a college football institution to possibly make it an incentive for them to play in these bowl games? Let's get to the bowl games here. Are they meaningful or meaningless? And this is a great debate, and there's no right or wrong here, but let me just point out a few realities here. One would be that these bowl games are deemed as meaningless by many because they do not determine a championship. So outside of the playoffs, they're just an extra game that's played and added to a team's record. Okay, they do not determine a championship. They do not factor in a championship, whether that be the national championship or conference championships. Well, if that's the barometer for meaningful football, then most of the games played during the regular season are meaningless. And I guess once a particular team is eliminated from conference championship consideration, or depending on your perspective, the national championship race, the rest of their games are meaningless. So maybe these players should decide to opt out sooner. Okay. In terms of the attention given to these games, if you walk on campus on any football playing school in America, in the FBS, and go to their football facility, they have a trophy case. They may have hundreds of trophy cases, depending on their achievements through the years. And you will find their bowl trophies. For winning bowl games, they are proudly displaying their bowl trophies. Okay, they're not displaying any type of record of defeating Rutgers in the middle of October or their win against TCU in September. Those are in the college football record book somewhere, but they're difficult to find. They're online somewhere. Okay, so there is meaning to bowl games. There is a trophy. There's a championship of sorts. You're the Rose Bowl champion. You're the Cotton Bowl champion, etc. Okay. They also count. People call them exhibitions at times. How are they exhibitions? They count on a team's record. If you're 10-2 and win your bowl game, you finish the season 11-2. There's no debating that. They count. They're not exhibitions. They're additional games added to the regular season depending on your status. You have to win 6 games to get to a bowl game unless there are other circumstances involved, like with Rutgers this year. So teams have to earn bowl participation. And what I find odd is that there's a lot of attention given to bowl games, even in this state of deteriorating attention. Just consider this. Outside of your massive, major regular season games, Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Auburn, we could go down a small list. On any given college football Saturday, even when those 2 games and others are played, there are competing games being played. There are 15 or 20 games that College Football Nation has the option of watching. So even if a Florida-Georgia game is a really good game, top 5 teams, well, there are 7, 8, 10 other games being played right then that are taking away much of the audience of that particular game. That doesn't happen during bowl season. More people are watching that particular team at that time than at any other time during their season. They are getting more attention, more television audience. That's what I would emphasize as a coach to my players if I felt as though they were deeming this game as being meaningless or an exhibition. I would say there are going to be more people watching you tonight. You are going to gain more attention and therefore possibly more criticism and ridicule and be looked down upon and downgraded based on your performance tonight because more people are watching you during the bowl games. We could go on and on about the relevance or lack thereof of bowl games and what to do with that. But in terms of opting out, there's freedom of choice in the country, and that's all there is to it. And there's no way for the institution, as has been suggested in feedback to me by many viewers, to penalize the players. How can they be penalized? They're making a decision to leave the team, quit the team. You could come up with and devise all sorts of penalties that don't affect them. You could say, we revoke your scholarship, you're not allowed on campus. Those things could be done. They don't need to come back to campus. They're not going to class anymore. They're preparing for the NFL draft. They don't need the school, the institution, or the football program anymore. Do they come back on campus and work out? Yeah, that happens a lot. But do they need to? No, they don't. They're self-sufficient at this point. They are NFL draft eligible players. They're going to be making millions of dollars within a few months. So there cannot be any penalties that are wielded against these players that are going to matter. And even if a particular football program or institution would do that, think about the reputation that they would gain with incoming recruits and recruiting classes and trying to build a reputation for being a place where players would want to go to play football. That wouldn't be good business. What's the resolution to all this? So one thought is to play the players. The players are already being paid via NIL. Many of you are a bit confused about what that is exactly. I'm not going to go into a definition discussion of that right now. But my thought is that the bowl sponsors basically pay for the bowl. You know, look at all the bowl games and you can readily see that there's a bowl sponsor, a company that's attached to the bowl game that is funding either the entire bowl game or part of that bowl game. Based on the research I've done, it seems to be anywhere between $500,000 and $20 million. And that could probably be somewhat estimated based on the prominence of the particular sponsor in that bowl game. Sometimes the sponsor is so prominent, they just take over the entire bowl game, and they are the bowl game. The Duke's Mayo Bowl, that's all there is to it. Other bowl games are long-established bowl games that then attach a sponsor to them. And I'm sure the payouts and the sponsorship dollars are different based on the magnitude of the sponsorship and how prominent they are in the promotion of the game. Do we take part of that money and distribute it to the players? If a particular sponsor is giving $10 million to that bowl to make sure it's running, well, much of that money is needed to pay for it to be on television, to pay for the facility to be used. And so a lot of that money is taken up. But can that be trimmed down? And can we take $1 million and divide it among 2 teams at 85 scholarships each, 170 players at $1 million? Do the math. That's how much money they would make. What's that, about $7,000 or $8,000 per player? Would that be enough? Would that be enough to deter opt-outs when these players are considering millions of dollars? And then we could run into the possible issue with a particular player saying, yeah, I'll play in the bowl game and make my $8,000, but sometime in the second quarter, he's not feeling great. And so he no longer wants to participate. A lot of people think that an expanded playoff is going to remedy this situation as well. Currently, we've got 4 teams and 3 games that matter in determining a national championship. There was a 12-team playoff proposal that was made public this past summer. Okay, is that going to... Well, that's going to expand it out to 12 teams and make those games meaningful. They're championship level games. But consider this. I was thinking about the situation with Kenny Pickett, the Pitt quarterback who opted out for the Peach Bowl. And on the other side, Kenneth Walker III, the star running back for Michigan State, opted out of the same game. So we've got a New Year's Six game with 2 top 12 teams in the country, and the 2 headliners both opt out. So we've got what turned out to be a third-string quarterback playing for Pitt, and we're minus the star running back for Michigan State. Okay, if that was a playoff game, would those 2 players opt out? Well, I think, number one, that it's less likely that they would opt out. That's obvious because no players have opted out of playoff games yet, versus players now opting out of Rose Bowl games. 4 Ohio State players opted out of the Rose Bowl, which is considered the king, the granddaddy of them all in terms of bowl games. It is the most important or most prestigious of the bowl games outside the playoff. So now we've gotten to a point where players are opting out of the Rose Bowl. Would they opt out of a playoff game, though? Probably not a playoff game versus playing a bowl game, and now it's elevated to a playoff game. But with an expanded playoff and the incentive of playing playoff games expanded from 4 teams and all those players on the 4 teams to 12 teams and all those players, 12 times 85 scholarship players, about 105 players per team. But consider this. If there's a risk of injury in one game that these players are considering, how much more are they going to consider the risk of playing potentially 3 games? I can see it now. Player A says, I'm really happy that my team made the playoffs, but with this expanded playoff format, if we make it to the national championship game, which that's the reason I would be playing in the playoff, is to win the games in advance, I'm going to play 3 additional games. And I'm not going to risk that because now I have 3 times more chance of getting injured, and maybe even more than that because the teams are better involved. The games are going to be more intense. So maybe there's a higher risk of injury. So don't be surprised if there would be opt-outs in a 12-team playoff or an expanded playoff field, or even in the 4-team playoff field, that we may see one day a player opt out of a playoff game. It's possible. It's possible if a player says, you know what, this is my senior season. I've played in 3 playoffs before. I've experienced this before. I've got national championship rings. I don't need this again. I don't want to risk the injury. Okay. So part of the purpose of this video is just to outline the issues here and how difficult they are to navigate. Another is to understand, again, we've got no right or wrong. I understand many of you are saying these players are quitting on their team. And I agree with you. They are quitting. They can make every excuse in the world. They are quitting on their team. They decided when they signed a scholarship They signed a scholarship. It's a contract. And so they decided to play each regular season. This just happens to be the last game of their last regular season. It's no more or less meaningful than any other game for the most part. So I agree with all of you that call these players quitters. They are, by definition, quitting on their team. They have to finish the season. There is still a season to finish. But they're deciding not to play. But there is no ramification against it. There is no way to enforce that these players are going to finish it out. If you place something in the scholarship wording that ties them to, as long as they are healthy, that they have to complete their senior or junior season, whichever is their last season with the school, I don't necessarily know if that could pass legally. I find it difficult to think that that would be something that could be legally enforced. And then would a school, even if it could be legally placed in a contract, and even if this would go over initially, okay, scholarships are now binding these athletes to finish out the regular season of their final year with the team. What happens the first time a player says, I'm still not going to play. I don't want to risk the injury. I'm not going to play. That school is going to go after that player legally, take them to court. What kind of public relations fiasco would that be in terms of, again, the school, the football program that wants to attract student athletes and says, this is the place for you to come and spend your 4 years with us. We are your destination because we're a family-friendly atmosphere and environment. But this player's opting out and we're going after them in court. Even though that would be their right, and it may be right in many people's eyes, is that good business? I think not. What was wrong with the bowl season this year? We did have players opt out. I don't know where that total lies. Of course, the further the bowl season goes, the more players opt out because we start with the marginal teams in the group of five, and then we work our way through to the better teams. Generally, the better teams play later in the bowl season. So we see more opt-outs later because the better teams obviously have the better players who are more draft eligible. Okay. We know Kenny Pickett, Kenneth Walker, Matt Corral could have decided to play. The 4 Ohio State players. Typically, I took in all the Power 5 bowl games, and it seemed as though we would have 2 to 4 players combined on both teams, something in that range, maybe a little bit more. Auburn had 3 defensive players against Houston opt out. That seemed to be generally the norm. How much did the bowl season suffer because of that? How much? On the very first day of bowl play, we had 7 games. We had a Cure Bowl, the very first bowl. I won't go through the big sponsorship name for the Cure Bowl. I don't even know it. Did you watch that game? Coastal Carolina held off Northern Illinois at the goal line on a controversial play. A great game and a great finish, 47-41. On that same day, Western Kentucky quarterback Bailey Zappi set single-season passing records for yardage and touchdowns in that bowl game against App State. On that same day, we had BYU and UAB, and we had Fresno State and UTEP. Go down to the wire, 1-score games down to the final possession. They were great games. That was just on day 1 of bowl season, regardless of who was on the field and who was not on the field. And I'm guessing we had 0 to 2 opt-outs in those 7 games on day 1. Let's salute Army. They won their bowl game against Missouri on the final play of the game on a game-winning walk-off field goal. That's what bowl play is all about. Even though Mizzou is playing with a backup quarterback, because, again, not just the opt-outs affecting bowl games, but the transfer portal. The starting quarterback from Mizzou, Connor Basilick, decided to transfer. So Mizzou was playing with a backup quarterback and without the SEC's leading rusher, Tyler Beatty. Did that really take away from the bowl game? Maybe it took away from our evaluation of how good the teams are. These teams in the better conferences playing without some of their star players. Absolutely. But in regards to the product on the field and the suspense and the drama and the entertainment on the field, does it really take away that much? Was bowl season that bad? How about Air Force? We'll salute the military academies defeating 2 Power 5 opponents in Missouri and Air Force in a thrilling game against Louisville, 31-28. Air Force, who had run the ball without throwing a pass 93 consecutive plays, then goes into the bowl game against Louisville, and what do they become? Air Raid, Air Force. They live up to their name and sling it all over the field for 200 yards, passing in the first half, and win a game against the Cardinals 31-28. And just in this last week, did you see some of the plays that Clemson made against Iowa State? That was a crazy, crazy one-score game. And it was pretty much a packed house in Orlando. And people loved watching that game. And Clemson had no opt-outs. Say what you will about Dabo Swinney and that culture, that environment. They're at Clemson, but no opt-outs for the Clemson Tigers. And it was a really good game against Iowa State. Did it mean much? It meant as much as a lot of other games by Clemson and Iowa State this year. And a hell of a lot more people watched it. How about that Purdue-Tennessee game that went down to the wire? Regardless of what you think of the final call, we see that in college football every week where there's a controversial call that we may disagree with. But in regards to the product, the entertainment on the field, a packed house in Nashville at the Music City Bowl. Purdue wins at 48-45 in overtime. That was a tremendous game. It made me feel like it was 1995 all over again. A bowl game, a lesser-tiered bowl game, third-tier bowl game. But there were 70,000 people in the stands. It was loud. It was rocking. And the entertainment, again, product on the field was amazing. And then after the playoff clunkers, somebody texted me today, how were the playoff games? Somebody that doesn't follow college football. And I said, boring. But then college football bounced back the next day on New Year's Day with some tremendous games. Kentucky, Iowa. That was a great, great college football game. Notre Dame up by 3 touchdowns. Oklahoma State comes back. And what did Mike Gundy say about that game? This is the biggest win in Oklahoma State football history. We played Notre Dame, Fiesta Bowl, great comeback. This is our biggest win in history for a really good top 25 type football program. So the bowl game meant something to Mike Gundy and his players, certainly, or they would have given up at 28-7. They did not give up. They come back and win the game. And then, of course, the Rose Bowl capped it all off. 55-52, the record-setting performances from Jackson Smith-Njigba and C.J. Stroud. Ohio State comes back from 14 down 4 times. And yes, were there 4-star players out? Yes. Did the other players who will play in the NFL someday, did they step up and compete? Yes, they did. It was the Rose Bowl. They came to play. Credit Utah as well. They played a miraculous game. It was a tremendous college football spectacle at the Rose Bowl, Ohio State and Utah. Bowl season might be flawed. It is flawed. It's not broken, though. It's still great entertainment. It is still great competition on the field. Show me where these players aren't giving their all almost all the time during bowl season. My thoughts on the situation involving opt-outs, how to correct it, how to fix it, if it possibly can be done, and bowl games and bowl season. Meaningful, I think. Meaningless, that might be your perspective. That's why we're here at the Voice of College Football. See you next time.